Hi everybody, I'm meteorologist Matt Gray. Welcome to another edition of the Brainstorm here on the 4 News Now YouTube page and on the Brainstorm with Matt Gray newsletter. Now, last week in our newsletter, last Sunday, in the spirit of the NCAA basketball tournament, which I had hoped by the time I recorded this, Gonzaga was still going to be in, but hey, can't predict that, how that was going to go. But in the spirit of that, I was like, you know what? I should do a bracket. I should do some bracketology of my own. And so what I ended up doing was coming up with this brainstorm bracket, a not so sweet 16. 16 weather terms that either people look at it and go, what the heck is that? Or they think they know what it means, but maybe their interpretation through just years of general pop culture talk has made it what you may understand it as is not exactly what it refers to. So things are not always what they seem with some of these. So I start off with 16. We've got it down to 4, and we're going to do the top 4 next week. And I'm going to have a Twitter poll up on my Twitter page, and if you're watching this via the Brainstorm video, we'll have links in that. We'll have links at the bottom of the YouTube video page to the poll, because I want to see which one of these weather terms that I put in the final 4 that you think you understand the least. And that's going to be our winner. And then, when we go over what they actually mean, then we'll see if you're right. So, I thought it'd be a neat, interesting little thing to do here in the peak of basketball season, postseason basketball around the country. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take all the ones that did not make the final cut here, and we're going to do a little bit of education. We're going to explain what some of these terms actually means. We're going to start in the top right, or the top left, on your screen, and we're just going to circle our way around. So we'll start off with the kind of blizzard section of the bracket here. So we've got bomb, cyclone, atmospheric river, and inversion. That ended up losing, at least in my mind, to blizzard. And of course, I'll explain a little bit more about the reasons why I say some of these things as we go into next week. We've got weather watch beating out weather warning. We've got dew point over heat lightning, and then going all the way into the final 4. This is one that I really wanted to include, and I'll show you why in a sec. Polar vortex getting overtaken by jet stream as far as easy to understand. High-low pressure. I think people have a general idea about cold fronts and warm fronts. High-low pressure, it's a little bit different, I think. Graupel. Had a good question about this when I posted this bracket on my Facebook page. Like, what the heck is Graupel? Well, we're going to find out over Supercell, and then monsoon going all the way over wind shear. You may think you know what monsoon means, and I think if you're from the Southwest, then you probably definitely know what it means, or if you have family that lives in the Southwest. Otherwise, this one may be one that you think you know, but you might not. But we'll explain that coming up. But let's go through some of the losers, I guess, here. I know it's a little bit backwards, but hey, weather can be backwards sometimes too, as far as the least likely to understand. So let's go through some of these. All right, bomb cyclone. We talked about this during the fall because we had a couple of them off of the coast of the Pacific Northwest. Really, it's a storm that has a really dramatic drop in pressure. And when the pressure drops in a storm system, that means that it's getting stronger. So the specific definition of a bomb cyclone, or a weather bomb, as it's officially called in the actual dictionary for the American Meteorological Society, yes, that is a thing, a storm that has its pressure fall 24 millibars, which is a measurement of pressure, in 24 hours or less. Certainly there are some storms that bomb quite a bit quicker than that measurement. So that's what a bomb cyclone is. And basically, whenever somebody says that, it means the storm is about to get stronger pretty quick. Then we have inversion. This is probably one that a lot of you know because, well, we deal with inversions quite a bit around here in the Northwest. You got a layer of warm air above a layer of air that's cooler below it. And especially when we have lots of calm days and clear nights, and we're able to cool off the ground in some of our valleys, and then that cool air just sinks down all those little river bottoms. And so you end up with an inversion. A lot of times that's what leads to our cloudy and foggy and just kind of miserable days we get sometimes during the winter. It's because of inversions, temperature inversions in particular. Atmospheric river, this is one we've been using a lot recently. It's a long, narrow section of the atmosphere that has a lot of water vapor, a lot of moisture content, and that means there's potential for a lot of rain, especially when it goes over some mountains like it does here in the Northwest. And so that water vapor, it moves along the lengthwise along this region, just like a river does. It is quite literally a river in the sky. In fact, these atmospheric rivers, they move a lot more water than any river down on the ground. All right, then we get down to this other bracket section, heat lightning. I could have taken this all the way because heat lightning is not real. If you've ever heard somebody say heat lightning, that doesn't mean anything. It means absolutely nothing. It's not a real phenomenon, but it is a little piece of weather folklore that you might have heard. And so I wanted to explain why we have people saying, oh, well, that's heat lightning. So what does this mean? Well, especially at night, a lot of times you can see lightning from a storm way off in the distance, but it's too far away to hear thunder. And of course, it's not raining because you're talking about a thunderstorm where in some cases, especially in some of our flatlands, say in central Washington, you could see the top of a thunderstorm from over 100 miles away down south in Oregon. So you're not going to hear thunder out of that. There's going to be rain nowhere close to you. But hey, it might be pretty warm. And so I think that's where that kind of that myth of heat lightning comes from. So it actually describes a distant flash of lightning. It's too far away to hear thunder, but you can see it a long, long ways away, especially at the nighttime. So somebody says, oh, that's heat lightning. Well, that's not really a real thing. It's just lightning from far away. All right. Then we go into something that I think is pretty important and something that a lot of people still get confused by. We're talking about watches and warnings. A weather watch. A weather watch means there's potential for severe weather within the next 48 hours. And basically what it means, if your area is in a weather watch, well, it means it's time to get ready for any potential bad weather that could be coming your way within the next 2 days. And this is one that I think people get really confused with, the one that seems more straightforward, right? Weather warning. That means, hey, we got to warn you about some weather. So a weather warning as opposed to a weather watch, well, that's something you got to take more action on. If where you live, if you're under a weather warning, it means severe weather. That's coming within 24 hours or it's already happening. It's time to take shelter in the case of a severe thunderstorm or a tornado, or it's time to think about changing your plans in the case of a winter storm warning, which we have quite a bit around here. Maybe time to change your plans or think about maybe not going to get the groceries today because the roads are going to be crummy. All right, moving around the bracket still, we have to the next bracket section. We have the polar vortex. What's the polar vortex? We talk about it sometimes. You'll see it if you watch the morning news shows from New York, like GMA. They'll talk about a polar vortex, the weather folks there. So a belt of high winds that circle the polar regions from fall to spring. And what this does is it separates that cold air up near the poles from the warmer air further to the south. And as this polar vortex, especially in the lower levels of the atmospheres, it becomes unstable, it'll wiggle around, and then all of a sudden that cold polar air starts racing to the south. Then we have our Arctic outbreaks that we get. So when people talk about the polar vortex, it's just a fancy way to say that basically that there's some cold air that's coming down out of the north. When people say it in kind of the general lexicon, I suppose, or the casual language, that's what it really means. But this is what it really means. That's what it generally means when people talk about, oh, the polar vortex is coming. Like 10 years ago, this suddenly became a thing. I don't know why. We could just say, hey, it's going to get cold. I think that we can dispense with some of the jargony words. All right. Speaking of jargony words that actually are useful, talk about cold and warm fronts. So when a storm comes by, these are places where warm and moist air and cool and dry air meet as they spin around these storm systems. And, well, because you're having different types of air colliding. That means usually the warm and moist air, it rises up over the cold air, and you get clouds, and then you get precipitation. So these fronts, it's important to keep track of them because that's where the weather is happening. Cold fronts and warm fronts. We'll talk about that a lot, especially cold fronts around here on TV. All right, then we have high and low pressure. So I think a lot of people know this, but I think it's become so generalized that it's probably good to have a refresher about what exactly these mean. So low pressure, rising air, clouds and precipitation as that air rises and condenses out its moisture. It generally, when we're talking about a low, that means we're talking about a storm. It can also be called a cyclone because winds around low pressure will rotate counterclockwise. High pressure is exactly the opposite. Sinking air, that means that the air is drying out, clear skies, and eventually, if high pressure stays over you long enough, just like that heat dome we had last year, that's another way to say strong high pressure, you end up seeing warmer weather as the days go by. So yeah, it might be pretty chilly, for example, when a cold front comes by and high pressure comes in right after that. But over time, you're going to see warming conditions, and eventually this is really associated with good weather more often than not. All right. We have our final bracket section. Let's go with Supercell. This is one that you may not have heard of unless you have spent some time in the Midwest or the South. Supercell, long-lived, rotating thunderstorm, often produces severe winds, large hail, and tornadoes. So essentially, supercells and really all thunderstorms, they have some specific parts, some specific sections. So you have what's called the updraft, where the air rises into the thunderstorm. It feeds the thunderstorm heat and moisture. Then you have rain that's coming down on the other side. It's with some cool sinking air, and that's the downdraft. So with a supercell, it's a really highly organized storm system because all the perfect ingredients are in place to create basically the most violent thunderstorm possible. And as the air moves up through this updraft into these storms, it actually starts rotating. So as you can imagine, vertically rotating winds, all you have to do is touch that down to the ground and you get a tornado. So especially across the plain states and in the deep south and the Midwest, a lot of these severe tornadoes that you see on the news or on the internet stories about these things happening, a lot of those are caused by supercell thunderstorms and the big massive hail and the strong winds as well. Speaking of winds, let's talk about wind shear. Sometimes when we talk about severe weather, which we don't do a lot around here in the inland Northwest, the traditional springtime severe weather, but we have to occasionally. Wind shear is something that comes up a lot, and basically all it is, winds are moving at different speeds or different directions or a combination of both at different altitudes. That's why weather balloons are so important, because it's measuring those winds, which direction they're going, and how fast they're moving as you get higher up in the atmosphere. And wind shear, basically that helps keep thunderstorms going, because if you push a thunderstorm over a little bit where it's kind of at an angle, that means that it's able, as it moves forward, it's much easier for that storm to be able to basically gobble up all that warm, moist air that's out in front of it, especially when it's coming in with a cold front behind it. And so when you tilt that storm over, the severe weather potential becomes much higher, and that's why we often look at wind shear quite a bit. And yeah, it's one of those terms that doesn't show up too often. It's definitely a bit more on the nerdy side of things, but it's something that shows up every now and then. All right, here's one that was off the Facebook page, and one that we get around here a lot, and that a lot of people go, when we say it, they go, "What the heck are you talking about?" So here it is, Graupel. I actually have another video here on the 4 News Now YouTube page that talks about Graupel and the difference between Graupel and sleet and hail. Go ahead, search for that. It'll explain in more detail, but here's the short form. Tiny ice crystals that form on the surface of a frozen raindrop, sometimes called corn snow, snow pellets. It feels like soft hail. It looks like hail or like fuzzy hail. You can kind of squish it, but it'll also make a little tink sound when it lands on your car, for example. So basically, you've got a raindrop and it freezes, and then ice accretes on it, or ice crystals grow on it, and then it falls out of the clouds. So that means there's a lot of kind of temperature changes up in these storm clouds. And so in the spring and the fall, we get a lot of Graupel around here because we've got mountains and we've got all sorts of temperature variations that we got to deal with around here. So Graupel, that's one that we see quite a bit. And like I said, we have another video here on 4 News Now YouTube channel with the Brainstorm, with me explaining Graupel in a bit more detail. And that brings us to the final 4. We're gonna have a final 4 here, 4 News Now, right? So are these weather terms that you think you know? Do you think you got a good idea? Or do you look at some of these? I bet a lot of you are looking at dew point right now and you're like, what in the world is he talking about? Well, next week, we're going to go through the final 4. I'm going to get a poll going. We're going to see which one you think you understand the least. That's going to be our winner. And we're going to see, once we explain all 4 of these, we're going to see which one, or see if your expectations matched up with reality, basically, and what you think. So, hope you have fun with this. I've had fun with this. And tomorrow or next weekend, Final 4 in the NCAA tournament. Final 4 here for this Brainstorm bracket of misunderstood weather phrases and weather terms. So I'll see you next week. In the meantime, have a good one, and like and subscribe here to the 4 News Now YouTube channel if you enjoyed this. We have more science, news, and weather updates every single day. Have a good one.